She walked into that bedroom thinking she'd find her son asleep. Instead, she found something that would destroy her entire world. What happened next wasn't just a crime. It was a mother's worst nightmare, turned into the unthinkable. And by morning, 2 people would be dead. This is the story of Rebecca Lawson, a woman who worked double shifts to keep her family afloat, who believed in second chances, who loved fiercely. But love, as it turns out, can also be the thing that breaks you, and what she discovered that night would lead her down a path she never imagined she'd walk. A path that ended in blood. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Whether you're in the States, the UK, or anywhere else in the world, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, subscribe to The Only Witness so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Rebecca Lawson was 42 years old when this all began. She lived in a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of place where neighbors wave at each other from driveways, where kids ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on. Rebecca worked as a nurse at a local clinic. Long hours, exhausting shifts, but she never complained. She had her son to think about. Ethan was 17. Tall, quiet, the kind of kid who kept to himself but wasn't trouble. He played guitar in his room, got decent grades, helped around the house when asked. Rebecca raised him alone after his father left when Ethan was 3. She never remarried, never really dated much. Her life revolved around work, her son, and her mother, Dorothy. Dorothy Lawson was 68, a retired elementary school teacher who lived just 10 minutes away. She visited often, too often, some neighbors would later say. She'd show up unannounced with groceries, stay for dinner, sometimes sleep over in the guest room when Rebecca worked overnight shifts. Dorothy was sharp, opinionated, and deeply involved in Ethan's life. She tutored him in math, drove him to guitar lessons, sat with him for hours talking about music and books. Rebecca appreciated it. She thought it was beautiful, actually. A grandmother who cared. A son who wasn't glued to his phone. A family that, despite everything, stayed close. But closeness, she would learn, can sometimes rot from the inside. Rebecca's childhood with Dorothy had been complicated. Dorothy was a strict mother, the kind who believed in discipline, in structure, in doing things the right way. She never hit Rebecca, but her words could cut deeper than any hand ever could. Rebecca remembered being 9 years old, crying over a failed spelling test, and Dorothy telling her that tears were a waste of time. "Fix it," Dorothy had said, "don't cry about it." So Rebecca learned not to cry. She learned to push through, to work harder, to never show weakness. And when she became a mother herself, she promised she'd be different. Softer. Kinder. She wanted Ethan to feel safe expressing his emotions, to know that it was okay to struggle, to fail, to ask for help. And for the most part, she succeeded. Ethan was a gentle kid. Thoughtful. The kind of boy who brought her flowers he picked from the neighbor's garden when he was 6. The kind who wrote her a card every Mother's Day, even as a teenager. Rebecca adored him. And Dorothy adored him too. Maybe too much. Rebecca didn't notice it at first, the way Dorothy's eyes would linger on Ethan when he walked into a room. The way she'd brush his hair out of his face, her fingers lingering just a second too long. The way she'd insist on driving him places even when Rebecca offered. It was subtle, so subtle that Rebecca convinced herself she was imagining it. Because who thinks that way about their own mother? Who looks at their son and their mother together and thinks, something's wrong here? It started small. Little things Rebecca brushed off, like the way Ethan would tense up when she asked what he and his grandmother talked about, or how Dorothy would change the subject quickly if Rebecca walked into a room mid-conversation. There were text messages too, late at night. Rebecca saw them once when Ethan left his phone on the kitchen counter, just the notification preview, Dorothy's name, and a message that said, "We can't keep doing this." Rebecca frowned. Doing what? She almost asked him, but she didn't. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe they were planning a surprise for her birthday. Maybe Dorothy was helping him with college applications. Maybe she was overthinking. Except she wasn't. Because 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night in late September, Rebecca came home early from her shift. The clinic had been slow. She texted Ethan to let him know she'd be back by 9 instead of midnight. He didn't respond. When she pulled into the driveway, she noticed Dorothy's car parked on the street. That was odd. Dorothy hadn't mentioned she'd be coming over. Rebecca unlocked the front door quietly. The house was dim, no TV sounds, no music. She called out, "Ethan?" Silence. Then, from upstairs, she heard something. A laugh. Low, muffled. Her stomach turned. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The hallway was dark except for a sliver of light coming from under Ethan's bedroom door. She stood there for a moment, hand hovering over the doorknob. And then she opened it. What Rebecca saw in that room would replay in her mind every single day for the rest of her life. Her son, her mother, together, in a way that no mother, no daughter should ever witness. She didn't scream at first. She just stood there, frozen, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Ethan scrambled backward, his face pale, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. Dorothy sat up, pulling a blanket over herself, her expression calm, too calm. "Rebecca," Dorothy said softly. "Let me explain." "Explain?" The word came out of Rebecca like a gasp. "Explain what?" Ethan was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, please, Rebecca's legs gave out. She sank to her knees right there in the doorway, her hands covering her face, a sound escaping her throat that she didn't recognize. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was something deeper, primal, the kind of sound that comes from a place inside you that you didn't know existed until it breaks open. Dorothy stood up, wrapping herself in a robe, and walked toward her. "Rebecca, listen to me. This isn't what you think." Rebecca looked up at her mother, her vision blurred with tears. "Then what is it, Mom? What is this?" Dorothy crouched down in front of her, reaching out to touch her arm. Rebecca jerked away. Don't touch me." Ethan was still on the bed, his head in his hands, his whole body shaking. Rebecca looked at him. Her baby, her son, and she didn't recognize him. "How long?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. "How long?" she screamed. 6 months, Dorothy said quietly. Rebecca turned to her, her face twisted in disbelief. 6 months? 6 months, and you did this?" Dorothy's jaw tightened. "He came to me. He needed someone." "Someone?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "He's a child. He's 17. He's your grandson. And you... She couldn't finish the sentence. The words wouldn't come. "Because how do you name something so unthinkable?" Rebecca stood up, stumbling backward into the hallway. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to not be in that house. But her legs wouldn't move. Her mind was spinning, fragmented thoughts crashing into each other. Did anyone else know? How did this start? Was it him? Was it her? Oh God, oh God, oh God. Ethan finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Mum, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Rebecca stared at him. "Sorry? You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done? What she's done to you?" "He's not a victim," Dorothy said sharply, standing now. "He made a choice. He wanted this." Rebecca's head snapped toward her mother. "Wanted this? He's 17. You're 68. You're his grandmother." Dorothy's face hardened. "I know what I am, and I know what we are." Rebecca felt something inside her chest crack open, something dark and cold flooding in. She looked at her mother, this woman who raised her, who taught her how to braid her hair and bake bread and stand up for herself, and she realized she didn't know her at all. "Get out," Rebecca said, her voice low and trembling. Dorothy didn't move. "I said get out. Now." "Fine," Dorothy said, her tone clipped. "But this conversation isn't over." "Yes, it is," Rebecca whispered. "It's over. Everything is over." Dorothy grabbed her purse from the chair by the door and walked past Rebecca without another word. She didn't look back. Didn't apologize. Didn't cry. She just left. And Rebecca stood there in the hallway staring at her son, who wouldn't look at her. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She sat in the living room staring at the wall, her phone in her lap. She thought about calling the police. She thought about calling her sister. She thought about packing a bag and leaving and never coming back. But she didn't do any of those things. She just sat there. Ethan stayed in his room. At some point around 3 a.m, Rebecca heard him crying. Soft, muffled sobs through the wall. And even though she was angry, even though she was horrified, a part of her still wanted to go to him. Because he was her son. And that instinct, that need to protect him, didn't just disappear because of what he'd done, but she stayed where she was, because she didn't know how to look at him anymore. The next morning, Rebecca called in sick to work. She stood outside Ethan's door for a long time before finally knocking. "We need to talk," she said. He opened the door. His eyes were red, swollen. He looked younger than 17. He looked like a little boy. They sat in the kitchen. Rebecca made coffee she didn't drink. Ethan stared at his hands. "Tell me the truth," Rebecca said quietly. "How did this start?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. It just happened." "Things don't just happen, Ethan. Not like this." He looked up at her, his face crumpling. "I didn't know what to do, Mom. I didn't know how to stop it. So you knew it was wrong?" He nodded. "Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't think you'd understand." Rebecca's chest tightened. "Understand? Understand what? That your grandmother, that she couldn't say it." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said it was okay. She said it was natural. She said people wouldn't understand, but that didn't make it wrong." Rebecca felt bile rise in her throat. "She manipulated you." He shook his head quickly. No, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" "Tell me." Ethan didn't answer. Rebecca reached across the table, gripping his hand. "Baby, listen to me. What she did to you. That's not love. That's not okay." "I know," he whispered. "I know, but part of me didn't want it to stop." And that admission, that raw, broken confession, shattered something in Rebecca, because it meant this wasn't simple. It wasn't black and white. It was messy and complicated and awful in ways she couldn't untangle. Rebecca spent the rest of that day trying to make sense of it all. She replayed every interaction she'd witnessed between Ethan and Dorothy over the past year. The small touches, the inside jokes, the way Dorothy would light up when Ethan entered a room. And Rebecca wondered, how did I miss this? How did I not see it? She thought back to a night 6 months ago. Dorothy had offered to stay with Ethan while Rebecca worked a double shift at the hospital. Rebecca had been grateful. She'd come home the next morning to find them both asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over them, the TV still on. She'd smiled at the sight, thought it was sweet. Now the memory made her sick. Had it already started then? Had they already crossed that line? And if so, how many times? How many nights had Rebecca been at work, exhausted and grateful for her mother's help, while this was happening under her own roof? The guilt was crushing. Because she was his mother. She was supposed to protect him. And she'd failed. She'd let a predator into his life, and that predator was her own mother. That evening, Rebecca's sister Monica called. Monica lived 2 states away, had 3 kids of her own, and usually only called on birthdays or holidays. But somehow she knew. "Hey," Monica said, her voice cautious. "You okay? You sound off." Rebecca hadn't realized she'd answered the phone. She stared at the wall, the phone pressed to her ear, and said nothing. "Becca?" Monica pressed. "What's wrong?" Rebecca's voice came out flat, lifeless. "Mum's been sleeping with Ethan." Silence. Then, "What? You heard me. Rebecca, that's not funny. I'm not joking." Monica's breath caught. "Are you serious right now?" Rebecca closed her eyes. "I walked in on them. Last night. Oh my God. Oh my God, Becca. Have you called the police?" "No." Why not? Because I don't know what to do, Monica. I don't know. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix this, Monica said firmly. You need to report her. She needs to be arrested. She's our mother. I don't care, Monica's voice rose. She's a predator. She hurt your son, our nephew. You have to report her. But what if Ethan doesn't want that? What if he thinks he wanted it? Monica was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Becca, he's 17. He's a kid. Even if he thinks he wanted it. He didn't. He couldn't. Not with her. Not like that. She manipulated him, and you know that. Rebecca did know that. But knowing it and accepting it were two different things. 2 days later, Rebecca finally called a lawyer. Not to press charges, not yet, but to understand her options. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Karen Whitmore, listened quietly as Rebecca explained the situation. When Rebecca finished, Karen leaned back in her chair and sighed. This is a difficult case, she said gently. Legally, your son is a minor. What your mother did constitutes statutory rape, even if he says it was consensual. It wasn't. Not in the eyes of the law. Rebecca nodded. So, what happens if I report her? Karen folded her hands on the desk. She'll be arrested. There will be an investigation. Ethan will have to give a statement. There will likely be a trial, and it will be very public. Rebecca's stomach turned. What if I don't report her? Karen's expression softened. Then nothing happens. Legally, anyway. But Rebecca, this won't go away. Not for you. Not for Ethan. And if your mother did this to him, she could do it to someone else. Rebecca hadn't thought of that. The idea that Dorothy might hurt another child, another grandchild, made her feel sick. But the idea of putting Ethan through a trial, of making him relive this in front of strangers, felt just as unbearable. I need time, Rebecca said quietly. Karen nodded. Take the time you need, but don't wait too long. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Rebecca left the lawyer's office feeling more lost than ever. She sat in her car in the parking lot and called Ethan. He answered on the third ring. Yeah, we need to talk, Rebecca said. Again? Yeah. Again. Ethan sighed. Okay. When Rebecca got home, Ethan was waiting in the living room. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. Rebecca sat down across from him. I talked to a lawyer today, she said. Ethan's face went pale. Why? Because I need to understand what our options are. You mean your options? Ethan said bitterly. No, Rebecca said firmly. Our options. This affects both of us. Ethan looked away. What did they say? Rebecca took a deep breath. They said that what Grandma did, it's illegal, even if you thought you wanted it. Even if you said yes. She's an adult. You're a minor. And she took advantage of that. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm not pressing charges. I'm not asking you to, Rebecca said gently. I just want you to understand that what happened wasn't your fault. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Then why do I feel like it was? Because she made you feel that way, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. Because she manipulated you, and that's what predators do, Ethan. They make you think it's your idea, that you wanted it, that you're the one in control. But you weren't. You never were. Ethan broke down then, fully. He sobbed into his hands, his whole body shaking, and Rebecca moved to sit beside him. She wrapped her arms around him and held him while he cried, and for the first time since that horrible night, she felt like she was doing the right thing. After a while, Ethan pulled away, wiping his face. What do we do now? He asked. Rebecca took his hand. We figure it out, together. But Ethan, I need you to be honest with me. About everything. He nodded. Okay. How did this start? Ethan hesitated, then he took a deep breath. It was last March, he said quietly. You were working nights a lot. And Grandma was staying over to keep me company. One night we were watching a movie, and she started touching me. Not like Not inappropriate at first, just my arm, my shoulder. But then it changed. She started saying things about how mature I was, how handsome, how much she cared about me. Rebecca's heart ached. And then? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. And then one night, she kissed me. And I didn't stop her. Rebecca squeezed his hand. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought it was my fault. I thought I led her on somehow. You didn't, Rebecca said firmly. You were a kid. You are a kid. And she knew better. Ethan nodded, tears streaming down his face again. I'm sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for, Rebecca said, pulling him close again. Nothing. Later that afternoon, Dorothy called. Rebecca didn't answer. She called again and again. On the fifth call, Rebecca picked up. What do you want? We need to talk, Dorothy said calmly. There's nothing to talk about. Rebecca, you're overreacting. Overreacting? Rebecca's voice rose. You had sex with my son, your grandson. And you think I'm overreacting? He's not a child, Dorothy said coldly. He's nearly 18. And what we have, it's more than you could ever understand. Rebecca felt something snap. Where are you? What? Rebecca's voice was sharp now, dangerous. Where are you right now? I'm at home. Why? Stay there, Rebecca said. I'm coming over. And she hung up. Ethan grabbed her arm as she headed for the door. Mom, don't. Let me handle this, Rebecca said. You've done enough. Mom, please. She pulled her arm free and walked out. Rebecca drove to her mother's house in silence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mind was a roar of rage and grief and disbelief. When she pulled into the driveway, Dorothy was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, calm as ever. Rebecca got out of the car and walked toward her. You need to leave him alone, Rebecca said. He's my grandson. I'll see him if I want. No, you won't. Dorothy tilted her head. Are you threatening me? Rebecca stepped closer. I'm telling you, stay away from him, or what? Rebecca didn't answer. She just stared at her mother, this woman she no longer recognized. Dorothy sighed. You always were dramatic, Rebecca. Even as a child, you twist everything into some tragedy. This isn't a tragedy, this is love. Love? Rebecca's voice cracked. You destroyed him. I loved him, Dorothy said simply, and he loved me, and whatever you think happened, it was real. Rebecca felt something inside her chest ignite. A heat, a fury, a grief so deep it felt like drowning. And before she knew what she was doing, she shoved her mother hard. Dorothy stumbled backward, her eyes wide. Rebecca, stop! But Rebecca didn't stop. She shoved her again, and again. Dorothy hit the porch railing, her hand reaching out to steady herself. And that's when Rebecca saw it. The calmness, the lack of remorse, the cold, detached look in her mother's eyes, and something in Rebecca broke. She grabbed her mother by the shoulders and slammed her against the wall. Dorothy gasped, her hands clawing at Rebecca's arms. Rebecca, let go! But Rebecca didn't let go. She squeezed harder, tears streaming down her face. Her breath ragged. You took him from me, Rebecca sobbed. You took my baby. He was never yours, Dorothy choked out. And that was it. That was the moment. Rebecca's hands moved to her mother's throat. Dorothy's eyes went wide. She tried to push Rebecca away, tried to scream, but Rebecca's grip was iron, fueled by rage, by heartbreak, by a mother's love twisted into something unrecognizable. For a moment Rebecca saw flashes, Ethan as a baby, his first steps, his first word, Mama. She saw him at 5, running toward her with arms wide open, at 10, building a birdhouse in the garage, at 15 laughing at a joke she didn't understand, and she saw Dorothy, holding him as a newborn, reading to him at bedtime, cheering at his school plays. How could the same hands that rocked him to sleep do this? Dorothy's face was turning red now, then purple. Her hands weakened. Her eyes started to roll back. And Rebecca didn't let go. She held on, held on through the thrashing, held on through the gasping, held on until Dorothy's body went limp. And then, only then, did Rebecca let go. Her mother crumpled to the floor. Rebecca stood there shaking, staring down at her hands, at what she'd done, and then she heard it. A car door. She turned. Ethan was standing in the driveway, his face white as snow. "Mum, what did you do?" Rebecca didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stood there, her hands still trembling, her mother's body at her feet. Ethan walked slowly toward the porch. His eyes never left Dorothy. Is she dead?" Rebecca nodded. "Oh, God," Ethan whispered. "Oh, God, Mom, what did you do?" "I don't know," Rebecca said, her voice hollow. "I don't know. We need to call the police." "No, Mom, we have to." "I know," Rebecca said. "I know." She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 911. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. When the operator answered, Rebecca said, "I need to report a death." The operator's voice was calm, professional. "What's your location, ma'am?" Rebecca gave the address. "Can you tell me what happened?" "I killed her," Rebecca said simply. "I killed my mother." "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. Are you in danger right now?" "No." "Is anyone else in danger?" "No." "Okay. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me." Rebecca sat down on the porch steps. Ethan sat beside her. He didn't say anything, didn't touch her, just sat there staring at nothing. The police arrived 7 minutes later. Rebecca didn't resist, didn't run, didn't explain. She just sat there, staring at nothing. Ethan was taken to a neighbor's house. He didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared. The weeks that followed were a blur. Rebecca was held without bail. The media picked up the story. Small-town nurse kills her own mother. Shocking family secret revealed. Incest, murder, and betrayal. The headlines were everywhere. Rebecca's lawyer, Karen Whitmore, took on her case pro bono. She believed Rebecca. Believed that what happened was a crime of passion, driven by unbearable emotional distress. But the prosecution didn't see it that way. They saw a woman who took the law into her own hands, who killed in cold blood, who could have walked away but chose violence instead. The trial began 8 months later. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows, curious onlookers filled the gallery, and Ethan sat in the front, his face pale and drawn. The prosecution went first. They painted Rebecca as unstable, violent, a woman who let rage consume her. They showed photos of Dorothy's body, of the bruises on her neck, of the scene. They called witnesses. Neighbors who said Rebecca and Dorothy had always been close. Co-workers who said Rebecca never mentioned any family problems. They made it seem like the murder came out of nowhere. Like Rebecca just snapped for no reason. But then Karen stood up, and she told the real story. She called Ethan to the stand. He was terrified, his hands shook as he was sworn in, but he told the truth. All of it. He described how Dorothy had groomed him, how she'd manipulated him, how she'd convinced him that what they were doing was love. He described the shame he felt, the confusion, the guilt, and he described the moment his mother walked in, how his whole world shattered in that instant. The courtroom was silent. Some people were crying. When the prosecution cross-examined him, they tried to paint him as complicit, as someone who wanted the relationship. But Ethan didn't waver. "I was 17, he said, his voice steady. "She was 68. She was my grandmother. I didn't want it. I just didn't know how to stop it." Karen also called a psychologist. Dr. Ava Brennan specialized in trauma and abuse. She explained how victims of familial sexual abuse often feel conflicted, how they can experience both love and fear toward their abuser, how grooming works, how it destroys a person's sense of reality. And she explained what happens to a mother when she discovers her child has been abused by someone she trusted. "The term is acute psychological trauma," Dr. Brennan said. "When a mother learns that her child has been harmed, especially by a family member, the brain can enter a state of extreme distress. Logic shuts down. Survival instincts take over. And in some cases, rage becomes the only response. It's not premeditated. It's not calculated. It's a psychological break. Karen then addressed the jury directly. Rebecca Lawson is not a monster, she said. She's a mother who was faced with the unimaginable. A mother who discovered that the one person she trusted most in the world had violated her son in the worst way possible. And in that moment, she broke. What she did was wrong. She knows that. But it was not murder in the first degree. It was a crime of passion, a crime born out of unbearable pain. And it deserves mercy. The prosecution argued that Rebecca had time to think, that she drove to Dorothy's house, that she made a choice, but Karen countered. She was in shock, Karen said. She was operating on pure emotion. And yes, she drove to that house, but she didn't go there to kill. She went there to confront, to protect her son. And when Dorothy showed no remorse and when she defended what she'd done, Rebecca snapped. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the third day, they returned with a verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder. Not first degree, not manslaughter, second degree. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others booed. Rebecca sat quietly, her face blank. She'd expected this. When it came time for sentencing, the judge, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Hollis, took her time. She looked at Rebecca for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Mrs. Lawson," she said, "what you did was a crime, and the law is clear. Taking a life is not justified, no matter the circumstances. However, I am also a mother, and I cannot imagine the pain you felt when you discovered what had been done to your son. I cannot imagine the rage, the heartbreak, the sense of betrayal. What your mother did to your son was evil, and while the law does not allow me to excuse your actions, it does allow me to consider the context. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 12 years in prison. Not life. 12 years. Because what happened in that home was a tragedy that no mother should ever face. And while the law must be upheld, mercy must also have a place." The courtroom was silent. Rebecca nodded. She didn't cry, didn't argue, she just nodded. Rebecca was transferred to a women's correctional facility in North Carolina. The first few months were the hardest. She kept to herself, didn't talk much, didn't make friends. But slowly she began to adjust. She got a job in the prison library, started taking classes, started writing letters to Ethan. At first, he didn't write back. Rebecca understood. She'd killed his grandmother. Even though Dorothy had hurt him, she was still family, and Rebecca had taken that away. But after 3 months, Ethan finally replied. His letter was short. Just a few lines. "Mom, I don't know how to feel about what you did, but I know you did it because you love me, and I love you too. I'll come visit soon." And he did. Once a month, Ethan drove 3 hours to see her. They'd sit across from each other in the visiting room, talking about everything and nothing. About his therapy sessions, about college, about music, about life. Slowly, they started to heal. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it was happening. Ethan graduated high school, got accepted into college, started studying psychology. He wanted to help other survivors, he told Rebecca. He wanted to make sure no one else went through what he did. Rebecca was proud. So incredibly proud. And even though she was behind bars, even though she'd lost so much, she still had her son. And that, she realized, was enough. Dorothy's funeral was held 2 weeks after her death. It was small, quiet. Only a handful of people attended. Rebecca's sister Monica was there. A few of Dorothy's old colleagues from the school, some neighbors, but no one from Rebecca's side of the family. Because they all knew the truth now, and none of them could mourn Dorothy. Not after what she'd done. Monica stood by the grave long after everyone else had left. She stared down at the headstone, Dorothy Ann Lawson, beloved mother and grandmother. The words felt like a lie, but Monica didn't have the heart to change them. She thought about Rebecca, about Ethan, about how one person's actions had destroyed an entire family, and she wondered, how does something like this happen? How does a grandmother look at her grandson and see that? Monica didn't have an answer. She didn't think anyone did. She just stood there in the cold, staring at the grave of a woman she no longer recognized. And then she left, and she never came back. Years passed. Rebecca served her time quietly. She became a model prisoner, took every class offered, helped other inmates learn to read, became someone people respected. And every month, without fail, Ethan visited. On Rebecca's 5th year in prison, Ethan brought someone with him. A young woman, her name was Clara. She was kind, soft-spoken, studying to be a teacher. Ethan introduced her as his girlfriend. Rebecca smiled. It was the first real smile she'd had in years. Clara didn't judge her, didn't ask intrusive questions. She just treated Rebecca like a person, like a mother, and that meant everything. By Rebecca's 8th year, Ethan and Clara were engaged. They got married in a small ceremony. Rebecca couldn't attend, but Ethan sent her photos. He looked happy, truly happy, and that was all Rebecca had ever wanted for him. 2 years later, they had a baby, a little girl. They named her Grace. Ethan brought her to visit when she was 3 months old. Rebecca held her granddaughter through the glass partition and cried, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude, because despite everything, despite all the pain and the horror and the loss, life had gone on. Ethan had healed. He'd built a life, a family, and he'd forgiven her. That was the greatest gift Rebecca could have ever received. Rebecca is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in North Carolina. She has 4 years left. Ethan still visits once a month now with Clara and little Grace. They remember the good times before everything fell apart, and they look forward to the future, to the day Rebecca gets out, to the day she can hold her granddaughter without glass between them, to the day she can sit at a table with her son and his family and just be. Dorothy's name is rarely mentioned. When it is, it's always in the past tense, always with a heaviness that lingers, because some wounds never fully heal. Some betrayals cut too deep. But Rebecca has learned to live with it, to carry the weight without letting it crush her. She's learned that love and rage can exist in the same heart, that a mother's instinct to protect can drive her to unthinkable places, and that sometimes, even when you do the wrong thing, it can come from the right place. Some say Rebecca should have walked away, called the police, let the system handle it. Others say they understand. Because when the person you trust most in the world betrays you in the worst way imaginable, when they take your child and twist them into something unrecognizable, rage doesn't ask permission, it just takes over. So I want to ask you, do you think Rebecca deserved punishment or mercy? Could you have done differently? If it was your mother, your son, your family, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts on this. And if this story affected you, if it made you think, made you feel something, there are more stories like this. Stories about love, betrayal, and the thin line between the two. Check out the next video because sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened. Thanks for watching The Only Witness, and remember, subscribe so you never miss the next one.